Welcome to the NT podcast. I'm Nemanja Jurišić. Today's guest is Dr. Carlo Alvaro, philosophy professor at New York City College of Technology of the City University of New York. He is also author of the book Deism, A Rational Journey from Disbelief to the Existence of God, and one of the contemporary defenders of the Kalam Cosmological Argument from a deistic perspective. Dr. Alvaro, welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming to my channel. And we were supposed to record after the midnight in my time zone, but thank you for sacrificing yourself and waking up very, very
Oh,
early in the
no,
morning. So thank
this is not early for me. It's fine. I didn't want you to fall asleep while we were talking. 1
you.
a.m.
Yeah, it should be finished about 3 a.m. So that's too
No,
late. So yeah.
too late for
Okay,
me.
in this conversation, we will explore some of the deepest questions in philosophy and cosmology. Did the universe have a beginning? And if the universe has a cause, why think that cause is deistic creator? So let's begin. My first question, Dr. Alvaro, for you is you wrote a book about deism. We already said that. Could you explain your background and how you came to deism? How do you even define God? When you say God, what do you think about on that? And what attributes does God have according to your opinion? And what arguments would you give in support of the existence of such a being?
Yes, it's interesting. My deism book came from my um, discontent on the options on the table. Let me explain what I mean. At one point, there were just two options. One option is you are religious, right? You accept the existence of God, and then you have to pick a religion that makes more sense to you. But it seems that it's almost obligatory, right? Once you believe in God, you have to um, embrace a certain religion, whether it's Christianity or Islam. Seems that that's the normal course of action. And on the other hand, there's atheism. Now, of course, that you might argue, well, there's also agnosticism, but I group all that into atheism. So it's either disbelief or some kind of religion. And in my life, my intellectual life, I was never happy about those two options. I felt that they were too restrictive, one or the other. And and I came up with this idea that um, that you don't have to choose to be religious in order for you to believe in God. And and the idea came up to me because over the decades studying uh, arguments for the existence of God, I realized that those arguments were sound. They were at least to me, they were very persuasive. And when I studied the arguments, the so-called arguments, if there are any, for atheism or arguments, uh, at any rate, that try to disprove the existence of a certain God, I was very dissatisfied. I thought that these arguments were weak. They were not very well formed, and and so I found myself in this situation where all the arguments. Now I'm referring to, for example, the moral argument, the fine tuning, the kalam, which we will be talking about. All these arguments were very powerful, and so it was a strange situation because I said, "Well, what do I have to do now? Do I have to accept one religion or the other?" And I think with that book, I give an option to an intellectual option to people that they don't have to jump into a religion. They can be deists because in my view, all those arguments amount to a deistic God. Now, to answer the second part of your question, what is my definition of God? Well, the short answer is that, in my view, God is the only necessary being. And what I mean by that is that if there was a situation where nothing existed, right? Atheists and theists always talk about this idea of nothing. Well, out of nothing, nothing comes. There would be nothing right now. Not right now, there wouldn't be a right now. And because reality exists, I mean, there is something, the universe exists. It seems to me to follow that there must be something necessary, because everything else is not necessary. Everything else that we know is contingent. So that is my definition of God. It is the only necessary being that it grounds reality, right? And now, to be more specific, in my book, I discuss other arguments that lead me to believe that this God is very powerful, not necessarily omnipotent, like, for example, the God of Christianity. And not necessarily that, but certainly enormously powerful to create a universe and to set up the laws of nature, and also very intelligent. Maybe not necessarily omniscient, like in the case of theism, but definitely, because of the Kalam argument, as we will discuss later, I believe that it is not just an impersonal God. It must be a personal God, not something like Plotinus God, Plotinus I, for example, but a personal being. And the reason why I say that is especially because of the moral argument, because I believe that this God is the paradigm of moral value. And there is an argument in my book for that, right? The existence of moral value. So when you put these things, all these elements together, you come up with the idea of a deistic God, not probably in a traditional sense of deism, where many deists would say that God is not necessarily a personal being or is distant. I don't necessarily believe that this God is distant because of his creation, but I do believe that we don't have a direct relationship with this God in a theistic sense, in the sense that we are required to eat certain things on Friday and go to church on Sunday and so on. That's my view on deism. Now, you might say, but why do you care then if this God doesn't give you rules, does not require that you go to church or you do certain things? Why do you care? Well, intellectually, I think it makes a huge difference, because it's like philosophically, I think you want to complete the puzzle, right? An intellectual puzzle. And when you start thinking about it, why is it that logic works? Why is it, for example, that mathematics works? Why is it that we have moral value? Why is it that we have free will? Why is there anything at all? And so all these answers, I think, that make sense if you postulate the existence of this God. So that's my conclusion, my best conclusion. Now, the theists would say, well, I can go further than that, and I think that it is a specific God. So Jewish would say it's the Jewish God. Well, it's the same God, right? Or a Muslim would say, no, it's Islam reveals the real God, or Christianity, obviously. And I discussed that in my book, and I think that while there is some evidence, there's not enough evidence for me to conclude that any of those religious books indicate that there is a theistic God.
Well, thank you, Dr. Alvaro. So you're standing on the shoulders of some giants in the science, but deism was much more popular in 18th century. Today, it's like less than 0.1% people believe in deism, but I think functional deism is much more present, about 10 to 20%, because many Christians would believe in Christian God, but when you dive a little deeper, you will find out that they don't actually believe that this God do some miracles and reveals, or you can have relationships. So, what do you think on all this?
Yeah, I think you're correct, because it seems to me that that many, and I'm not saying this in an insulting or offensive way, by the way, but it seems to me that many religious people tend to yes, try to go by the books, whichever book they follow, whether it's the Bible, the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita. But obviously, there's a certain degree of interpretation, and they interpret religion the way that best fits their lifestyles, and so in a sense, yes, you can say they are deists in that sense, because they create their own interpretation of the religion. Yeah, it says here, it's written here, I'm not allowed to eat fish on Monday, but I think that God would allow me to do it, or any other practice, and that seems to be the case in many religions.
Wonderful. So I wonder, how would you approach this question? Introduction to your article, Atheism as an Extreme Rejection of Rational Evidence for the Existence of God. You explain that explicit atheism has two approaches. One is to provide rational arguments that God does not exist, such as the problem of evil, divine hiddenness, and many more. And on the other hand, is to show that positive arguments for God existence, such as Kalam argument and others, are not convincing. So could you say more about that, and how would you approach even the problem of evil and other things as a deist?
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I wrote that article, I remember I was very disappointed, because all these great atheists, these famous atheists would go and would flood the media with these assertions. There's no God. Science has disproved the existence of God, etc. And I found it very silly, because you cannot do such thing. How are you going to prove? What arguments are there to support atheism? Take the argument from evil as an example, which, by the way, I recently published a new argument from evil. But when you think about the argument from evil, There's evil in the world. There's a lot of suffering in the world. There's even a lot of suffering. Philosophers have argued over the years. There's a lot of suffering that seems to me gratuitous. There's a lot of tremendous suffering that seems to be useless. How can there be a God? Well, does that lead to the conclusion that there is no God? Absolutely not. No argument from evil shows that God doesn't exist. So the argument from evil is not an argument in support of atheism. If anything, it's an argument in support of deism, a certain kind of deism. There are many kinds of deism. You could say, because there is tremendous evil in the world, right? There is a God, but this God either doesn't care or is not powerful enough to destroy evil, or it has a plan, and he needs that evil in order to accomplish some goal, some divine goal that he set out to accomplish. We don't know. So all those arguments from evil don't really amount to atheism. They don't support atheism. And on the other side, the other strategy for atheists is to demonstrate that theistic arguments are fallacious or uncogent. But we're in 2026, and as you know, there are many theistic arguments for the existence of a God, and philosophers and scientists are still talking about them, and many great minds, many great philosophers believe that these arguments are very persuasive to them, and they are sound. So I don't think that that's that the atheists have accomplished that either. And here we are.
Yes, thank you for this explanation. And last thing before we start finally about your premises and your argument about Kalam, I want to ask you, can you introduce your modus ponens deductive logical form of the argument, Kalam? And I saw also in your article that you have in your footnote inductive version. So can you present both? And also, what do you think about alternative methods and approaches? For example, Callum Miller formulated a probabilistic version of the argument using Bayesian theorem. Alex Bruce uses an abductive method, inference to the best explanation, while Richard Swinburne has offered an inductive version. So why you choose primarily deductive?
I didn't choose the deductive version for any particular reason, because I think that they all work the same way. In any case, the difference between deduction and induction is obviously the fact that an inductive argument is an argument where you have certain premises that are supposed to support a conclusion with a matter of probability, whereas a deductive argument is an argument form where the conclusion is either necessarily follows from the premises in such a way as that if the premises were true, it would be impossible for the conclusion to be false, or the conclusion doesn't follow at all. That would be a deductive invalid argument. But now the interesting aspect to deductive arguments is that you have to, and especially in the case of the Kalam cosmological argument, where the premises are not about trees or pizzas, right? Where you say there are two trees in the yard, and if there are two trees in the yard, it means that there are three squirrels on top of it. We're talking about premises where we're discussing the origin of the universe, right? So given the nature, especially of the premises in the Kalam, your job as a philosopher is to try to demonstrate that those premises are true. But the problem with truth is that it is hard to establish that something is true. I mean, even if I say that I am talking to you right now, and I'm looking at your face right now, proving that is true beyond, I mean, with 100% certainty is not possible. Okay, we have that problem, the matrix problem, right? We could be in the I could be in the matrix and imagine all this. So what you have to do is to try to give arguments in support of those premises and try to show that those premises, the premises of your main arguments, are more likely to be true than not. And so in the end, it's all a matter of what makes more sense, what makes more, what is more plausible, right? So whether you present it in a deductive form and inductive form, I don't think it makes huge difference. Now, the Bayesian strategy, I don't know, maybe it's me personally, but I don't like those arguments that use probability and Bayesian theory and mathematical theories. I don't know. I don't know what to do with those arguments. I mean, it sounds funny to me to say we can prove with 98% certainty that God exists, or I don't know, the Virgin Mary had a coffee in the morning. I don't know. So the most natural way to present the argument, I think, when you want to do business in philosophy, in my view, is to try to mount a deductive argument.
Fascinating. So, can I just remind you, can you present your current
Yes.
version of Kalam Cosmological Argument and both deductive and inductive? So you have both. So I wonder.
Well, the inductive would be something like this: that given the evidence that in our experience in the world, you can present it in many different ways, but given the evidence that we have, is more likely that that a god or a divinity is the cause for the existence of the universe. That essentially, and you can phrase it any way you wish. Deductive arguments, if you look at the original Kalam, the one presented by Al-Ghazali, is something like, not very different from the version that William Lane Craig presents, that everything that begins to exist has a cause for its existence, right? And because the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause. Now, when I wrote my originally my article, I presented the modus ponens in a slightly different way, choosing different words, different terminology, and I'll tell you why. And then in the book, I think it changes slightly. Now, I don't like the term cause, because I didn't want to get into that awkward conversation about the chair or the table or this object or that object didn't exactly begin to exist. If you watched my my conversation with Alex Malpass, for example, he argues, it's never the case that things begin to exist, but rather it's always the case that there's already something there. Like, for example, he gives the example of a headache. It's not that the headache begins to exist, but there's a head that starts hurting. Okay, so I wanted to completely avoid that kind of objection, and that's why I worded the premises essentially in terms of an efficient cause. As a matter of fact, I didn't want to use the word cause at all, right? That's why I worded the first premise as every object, or whether is physical object or a non-physical object, like an idea. Now, of course, if you're a materialist, you might believe that an idea is some brain activity or a neuron structure, etc. But I don't believe so. I believe that an idea exists. Ideas exist. I'm having one right now, and they are not physical. So whether it's physical or non-physical, it requires to be brought into being, into existence, by something else. So that's the idea. Whenever you see something that could be physical or non-physical, there might be exceptions, of course, but physical or non-physical objects or things are always are brought into existence by something else. So if you are having an idea of going to Florida on vacation, that idea was brought into existence by something else. Okay, if you're making a cappuccino, that was brought into existence by something else. Now, there might be exceptions. For example, mathematical truths. Okay, you might argue that mathematical truths are necessary truths, that they exist and they are eternal. That's okay. That's fine. That's not a problem. But in any case, the point is that we have overwhelming evidence and numerous arguments and numerous reasons to believe that it must be true that any object, whether physical or non-physical, like ideas or concepts, require something else, an efficient cause, you can call it, that brings these objects into existence, right? So if you have a headache, using Alex's example, well, if you want to say that the head starts hurting, that's fine. There was a head there. But the point is that headache, now, by headache, I mean the experience, right? The subjective experience of the headache did not exist 3,000 years ago, and now it exists. Why? Well, it's not as if there's headache floating in the air, but there was a brain or a mind that brought that into existence, or a certain cause, or, for example, lack of sleep, or a protein that comes into existence by a process, the process that happens in the body. And that would be the efficient cause. So that's why I worded the first premise in terms of something is always brought into existence by something else. Okay? But only those things that begin to exist, they're not eternal. So if you want to say, well, there are mathematical truths and they are eternal, I agree with you. I'm not going to fight you on that. And I'm going to say to you, well, that premise does not apply to mathematical truths. It only applies to those objects that are not eternal.
Very good. So essentially, do you agree with three defenses from William Lane Craig when he uses argument from chaos, inductive argument from observation and science, and also principle ex nihilo nihil fit? So are those three arguments that you would use, or in a similar way?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Craig. Those are good arguments, I think. They're good arguments. Although many atheists don't like them for a variety of reasons. But what I would say is the following. You have to, when you try to establish the truth of a premise, what can you do? Well, the first thing that you can do is to find good arguments in support of it. And those are good arguments. I mean, when you think about it, it seems very plausible that objects like tables, well, the objects of our experience, right? All those objects like pizzas, tables, people, buildings, they begin to exist. They come into existence. Now, there might be, as I said, non-physical objects like ideas. Like take, for example, the concept of, let's say, justice. Maybe unless you are a Platonic thinker that like Plato thinks that there is justice right there in as a form, right? You can say that the idea of justice is a bunch of people coming together and then forming this idea as a process, or an idea itself, or an emotion. Those are I call them non-physical objects. They always come into existence. It's never the case that a pizza just pops into existence or an idea just exists independently of a mind. And so, yes, I would say I agree with the notion that we have evidence from everyday life, from our scientific experience, empirical evidence that things come into existence. There are certain things come into existence. Now, of course, the atheist is going to say, well, but why should you then extrapolate that notion and slap it on top of the universe? Because the universe is very different from the everyday life. You must have heard physicists like Sean Carroll and other philosophers or other atheists say, well, but the universe is different. Okay, but if you think, and my reply is, if you think that the universe itself is different, then why don't you give me an argument that I can accept, a powerful argument to the effect that the universe is different from everything else? Why don't you give me an argument? Give me some kind of argument. Show me that the universe is indeed so weird, so different from everything that we experience, every concrete things that we experience, every idea that we experience in this life, in this existence. And then you have a discussion with me. But as far as I am concerned, I don't think that atheists have advanced any sort of argument, right? So, as I said before, when you try to establish the truth of a premise, what you want to do is to, one, look at the arguments in favor of it, and two, see if there are any arguments in support of the opposite view, which would be that some physical and maybe some non-physical objects can come into existence without any efficient cause, out of nothing, from nothing, and by nothing. And when I put these two elements together, I think we have a strong argument that leans in the direction of the truth of the first premise. Now, some people say, well, you're not allowed to do that. In my discussion, for example, with Alex, he said, well, you're not allowed to do that because I'm not arguing that things can pop into existence. Well, whether you do or whether you don't, that's what I think logically I am allowed to do. And I have to do. I have to look at the evidence in favor and the evidence on the other side. And so I agree with Craig, with those arguments that Craig presents. And I would want to add to that there are no good reasons to believe that the first premise would be false.
Okay, very interesting. So I noticed in your article that you mentioned some expansion of this principle and say that every contingent fact is brought by something else. So can you comment briefly something on that?
Oh, well, that would be something like causal finitism, I guess. Well, yeah. I mean, that's essentially the same argument. The idea that everything that is contingent, everything that we know that depends on something else, right? Like people, physical objects, everything is that way. And it seems to me just that those atheists that say, well, but then you have to stop at the universe because the universe is different. And again, why? I ask, why is the universe different? Everything that comes into existence, everything contingent requires something else. Why is the universe different? In what respect is different? It seems that even science shows that the universe is contingent. And when you think about it logically, it seems that the universe is a contingent being simply by thinking that the universe did not have to be the case. You cannot find anything necessary about the universe. Everything about the universe is what it is. Even the laws within the universe are contingent. They didn't have to be true. They didn't have to be that way. Gravity could have been slightly different. And so that's a different angle for the same argument.
Yes, we will comment about that more later, but now I wonder, do skeptics have to show that at least one thing that begins to exist was not brought into existence by something else? You state that in article. Or is the burden of proof on you to show that surely not a single thing in history came to exist in that way, even if we have never observed it?
Yeah, I mean, when sometimes people say, well, how do you know? Maybe there is some remote corner in the universe, billions of light years away from here, where some things come into existence, just pop into existence. How do you know? That's not much of an argument. That's just really silly. So that's why what I say in that in that article, I say, I think that the best way, or I don't know if you're aware of my conversation with Richard Carrier, right? And he insisted on that. And I said, well, look, your best strategy would be to give me one example of something that can pop into existence, right? That begins to exist without any efficient cause, out of nothing. That's if you do that, that would be a great argument. And the burden of proof, I think it's on them, because they are the ones who go against the grain. They're the ones who are saying that everything that we know about science, I mean, the very project of modern science is to find what cause brings into existence what effect. And so once modern science is set up that way, and all our experience, empirical evidence shows that everything that begins to exist comes into existence that way because of some efficient process of cause, then at this point, it is the burden of proof is on you to show that all of this, all science and all our observations are not good enough. And there's some reason, even some remote reason, to doubt the truth of premise one.
All right, Dr. Alvaro, thank you again. And here is a longer question. So does the fact that when we observe the world around us, we inductively see that things that begin to exist come from something else, not actually mean that things cannot happen differently, but only that these are rules within our universe, and that at the moment of the cosmos beginning, and of the first events, we should actually expect strange things like the violation of the causal principle and similar. Does the argument from chaos then support the first premise? Because why would only the universe came from nothing and not the tables, babies, and pizzas from nothing as well that you state in the article, given that only a few things could come about that way while everything else still functions perfectly according to the first premise? Or perhaps only the universe came from nothing, and that does not necessarily mean that things must then start spontaneously appearing without explanation in a chaotic way. You addressed this before, but yeah, it's my question. So do you have anything to add?
Well, what I would say, I mean, this has been discussed so many times by supporters of the Kalam. But what I would say is that we don't have a mathematical proof, but it seems to not just to me, but to the greatest minds in philosophy and science, it just seems just bizarre that a whole universe could come into being for no reason whatsoever. And not only that, because you have to, you also have to consider what we call the fine tuning, because the universe didn't just come into existence, but it came into existence in a very, very specific way, as you know, because the initial conditions were very precise, and the laws are very precise, right? So it just seems impossible that something not only so precise, but the universe itself, the reality itself, could come into being out of nothing. I think that most people, even atheists, recognize that metaphysical principle of out of nothing, nothing comes is true. Just very few people have the guts to say that it might be possible. I believe that it's possible that the entire universe with all its laws could come into existence out of nothing. And those few who argue something like that, seems to me typically they rely on the quantum world. And that really makes me mad, because people abuse this term quantum. They throw it there at you, and they think that by saying the word quantum, they have some kind of permission to smuggle in anything that they want. But in the quantum world, particles pop into existence and go out of existence without a cause. And I've had discussions with philosophers and physicists about this, and I always ask them, how do you know? What is the evidence that these subatomic particles come into existence from nothing and by nothing? Which, by the way, if you have a quantum vacuum, that is not nothing. It is something. So they come into existence from, there is something going on already. And if you push back, I don't know what else to tell you. I would have to just say to you, that's the best that we can do. And the evidence shows that everything comes into existence from something else. And it seems quite bizarre that the universe could come into existence by something. But even a subatomic particle just popping into existence out of nothing would be strange. Imagine the whole universe. That's the best that we can do. And I don't think anybody can do any better than that.
Yes, and let me just ask this thing. Can your argument function without the first premise? Because Craig has another formulation with modest premise, like if the universe has a beginning, then it must have a transcendent cause. The universe have a beginning, so yeah, it follows. So you don't need to prove that all things that begin to exist came to existence by something else, but you could say just the universe has a cause. It's more likely that it has cause than it doesn't. So you can even make modest claim. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. But then that version of the argument, essentially, in a way, it only pushes back. It tries to get around the first premise, but I think that in the end, for all intents and purposes, it's saying the same thing. That, the first premise, my first premise, the traditional first premise, they all say the same thing. They say that only those things, and only those things, objects, entities that come into existence, that begin to exist, come into existence by something else. But the premise doesn't say that everything comes into existence by something else. So that Craig's version is essentially a corollary of that first premise, saying, well, if the universe came into existence, then there is a transcendent cause for the universe. Yeah, it's an interesting argument. I think that it's less, it is, as you put it, more modest, but it's less powerful, and with that version, you have more problems, in my view, that you have with the traditional version. But certainly that's another way to to set up the argument.
All right, thank you, Dr. Alvaro. Now, does the principle ex nihilo nihil fit support your premise, given that it is possible to accept that principle and at the same time deny the causal principle?
I don't think I understand the question. How do you deny the causal principle?
So you can imagine things that have a beginning and that they are uncaused, but still you can believe in ex nihilo nihil fit principle.
I don't think so. I mean, it sounds to me like a contradiction, because if you can imagine, I mean, you can, if you close your eyes and pop, you see a banana, right? You envision, you picture in your mind a banana, but obviously it's not coming into existence out of nothing.
But you can imagine like an eternal sequence of causes. So ex nihilo nihil fit. So that principle is fine because something cannot come from nothing. But on the other hand, causal principle can be violated. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if that's true. Maybe you can think of an eternal universe, you're saying, and yet that causal principle is still true. It would still be true because per hypothesis that the universe would be eternal, but anything that comes into existence would require some cause. I guess if that's the way that's what you have in mind. It's just hard for me to think that the first part of the sentence is true, that the universe could exist eternally.
Yeah, so that violates the second premise. But if we ignore that, then we don't see strict contradiction between those ideas. So we can imagine some strange world where we have those things accept one and deny others. So that's my point.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yes, but still, yeah, the point is that it's just impossible to think that anything could materialize out of nothing, at least without any efficient cause. Which is, by the way, something that some atheists are willing to argue, that the universe could have just popped into existence out of nothing.
Yes, like Lawrence Krauss, but they define nothing differently.
Oh, he
but
cheats.
Yeah,
He cheats. He's not talking about that.
Okay, so my last question for you about first premise is, do you have an example of something that would refute the idea that things which begin to exist are caused exclusively by material causes? In other words, do you have a counterexample where something that began to exist was caused by something immaterial, non-physical?
Well, my example would be a thought or a desire. Okay. And another example that I would give, but obviously this is a contentious example, it would be my mind. Okay. Because obviously, if you're a materialist, you would argue that there's no such thing as the mind. If you remember, for example, Daniel Dennett, rest in peace, he argued vehemently for decades that there's no such thing as the mind. It's all brain and neurons, etc. I'm not a materialist. I believe that the self exists and it's not material. Now, I'm not a Platonist. Plato believed that the soul is eternal and it enters the body, the physical body, and inhabits the physical body. I don't believe that. I believe that the soul or the mind is contingent, and that would be an example of something that comes into existence without a material cause. Another example is an idea. Let's say I have an idea of apple pie. I'm having that idea right now. Well, that idea did not come into existence from pre-existing apple pie idea. Now you can say, well, there was a mind that brought the idea into existence. Well, but then that only supports my argument, because I'm not a materialist. So I would say to you, the mind is a non-physical entity that brings the idea into existence. Now, granted, the mind has an effect upon the physical brain, whereby it stimulates the brain and it causes the brain to and neurons to fire certain chemicals in a certain way. But the mind is not physical, and the idea is not physical. So that is a perfect example of something that comes without pre-existing material. There's no pre-existing material for a thought or a desire or a feeling or a concept.
Thank you, Dr. Alvaro. Let's go to the second premise. You state the universe is something that began to exist. So you offer, I think, three supports, like two philosophical: actual infinities cannot exist, successive addition argument, and maybe scientific arguments, but we'll talk about that more. So first is no actual infinities. How do you defend that?
Okay, that's very interesting. Now, when you think about it, what exactly is an actual infinite? And for example, when I teach this, when I talk to my students about this at the university, they look at me puzzled. They say, I don't understand what you mean by an actual infinite. And the best way for me, for anybody, I guess, to explain what an actual infinity is what? It's to use mathematics, right? Because that's where the concept of an actual infinity lives, right? That's where the actual infinity exists, in mathematics. And they say to me, they ask me, but what does that even mean? Well, think of a container, and you put in that container, you put inside all the natural numbers: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a million, etc. Okay, and then I tell the students, now, how many numbers exist in that container or family or set, whatever you want to call it? And the answer is an infinity, right? An infinity. Now, what's important to understand about actual infinity is that if you think about it in terms of a container or a set that contains items, in this case numbers, it is very important to understand that those items are not being formed as we speak, right? I always tell people it's not as if there's a machine that cranks out numbers and the number of natural numbers is increasing, right? They're not coming into existence as we speak. They're already there. And how many are they? An infinity. Now, that's the best way that you can present the idea of an actual infinity. You can do better. You can say an actual infinity is not a real number. Right? Because that's what it is. It's not a number. It is, in fact, a set that is supposed to contain an infinity of items. And if you were to take, let's say, if you use the analogy, if you use an analogy, a library, and you have all these books on the shelves, right, an infinity of them. Now take out every even numbered book, number 2, number 4, 6, 8, etc. Take them out of the library. How many books do you have? You have the same number of books that you have originally. So the odd numbered books and the even numbered books, when you put them together, they are the same number as the even numbered books individually. And your head starts exploding at this point, right? That's the best way that you can explain it. So a subset of an actual infinity is as large as the whole. Now, I think that most people still at this point do not understand what you mean by that. They say, I just don't understand it. I'm sorry. And a lot of students in my when I teach the Kalam, when I talk about the Kalam or infinity, they just say, okay, I've heard you. Still don't understand what you mean. Well, you don't understand what I mean, I think, because when you talk about infinity, you're not talking about a number. You're not talking about a number. You're talking about a concept, a mathematical concept. And just right there, right off the bat, as they say, right there, that demonstrates that an actual infinity is not the kind of thing that you could find in the real world, in the physical world. Right? So to begin with, I want to say that. That simply tells you right away an actual infinity is not something that you find in the real world. Most people think, well, but I can think. Wait a minute. I can think of it. No, you cannot. You cannot picture an actual infinity in your mind. In my conversation with Alex Malpass, he says to me, well, we are thinking about it now, so I can imagine it. I don't think you can. How can you picture in your mind an actual infinity of items? And here's a reply was interesting. He says to me, well, think about the number, I don't know, a trillion, billion, gazillion, right? That's a finite number, but you cannot imagine it in your mind. You cannot picture it in your mind. Well, but it's not the same thing, because although that's a large number, it is a finite number. It's something that you can picture in the sense that you can see yourself, let's say, traversing, going through, let's say, a library that has a gazillion trillion books, but you can see yourself going from book number one all the way to the end. Perhaps it's going to take you a million years. You need immortality to do that, but that's understandable. Actual infinity is not something that you can picture in your mind. It's like saying, picture in your mind a square circle. And some people say, yeah, I can. If I close my eyes, I can picture. No, you cannot. Because what exactly are you looking at? You're looking at a circle, you're looking at a square. So it's not something that you can picture in your mind that you can understand properly. And that to me is the first sign that we are dealing with something that does not exist in real life. It cannot be instantiated in a physical world.
Yes, but standard move would be that it's just feature of infinity. It's weird, so we cannot picture, but we cannot picture also God. So you cannot imagine omnipotence or something like that. So or that God is eternally existing. So how to understand that?
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. We cannot picture a lot of things, but they're just weird. So what do you do after that? Well, then, as I said, as I always say, the strategy to me is that then if you are of the belief that infinities do not exist in the physical world, then in my view, you have two strategies available. The first one is to try to come up with arguments, reasons, demonstrations, practical demonstrations, where the purpose of these demonstrations is to show that they all lead to the same conclusion, namely that there is something not merely weird or strange, but something almost contradictory about an actual infinity. And the second strategy is to show that there are no good reasons, no evidence, no good reasons to believe that there could be actual infinities. I mean, if you have never seen one, and if conceptually they are strange, they're weird, they don't make sense, and you are not able to demonstrate how such a set that contains an infinity of items could even exist in principle, then when you put those two elements, those two strategies together, I think that your intuition should be moved in a certain direction. And that's what I would argue. Now, what is the first strategy? I didn't specify the first strategy of giving arguments to demonstrate the weirdness of an actual infinity. And people have done a great job doing that since David Hilbert with the strange hotel. But also, as you probably know, there are arguments such as the Grim Reaper, Thomson's lamp, the staircase. Maybe. There are so many arguments, and all these arguments. Okay, so you want to talk about any one of these arguments? You want me to explain?
Yeah, we could do that later maybe, because we want to cover causal finitism. So just for now, I think your move is good, but I need to ask other people what they think, maybe Malpas and other, because I'm not sure. But my thought and intuition is that if we have on one side a bunch of weird things, maybe impossible even, but even if they are not impossible, they're just weird and strange, and full of problems. But on the other hand, if you accept that universe is finite and that there is no infinities, you don't have any problem, I think. So I would like to see the move from atheists or people that believe in the eternal universe and causal infinitism and similar. I want to see their move to show any positive argument for their thesis. So maybe that would be good. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree with you. I agree with you. And if you pay attention, if you noticed, every time there's such a discussion, the atheist typically dodges the question. In my discussion with Alex Malpass, what he says to me is, and what everybody says to me at this point, they say, well, I'm not arguing that the universe is eternal. It might be eternal. Well, my friend, you're going to have to take a position, right? You can't just throw the stone and run away. If you say it is possible that it might be possible that the universe is just eternal, you just go back and back forever. Fine, then give me an argument. Show me how that might be possible, because I've never heard of any argument, any positive argument for that. The only thing that they say is, as far as I can see, as far as I understand, in my experience, the only argument is not even an argument, is I don't find it logically contradictory. I don't see the logical contradiction. Done. That's the best that they can do. And sure, I'm not saying that it's nothing. They're offering something, maybe, but compared to what we have on the other side, it just doesn't work for me, because on the one side, the arguments in support of causal finitism, whatever you want to call it, are much stronger. There are arguments. There are many arguments. On the other side, there's just, well, I don't see it, or my intuition, or it is logically possible. Well, there are a lot of things that are logically possible, strictly speaking, logically possible, but it's possible that this computer that I'm using to talk to you could be made of ice. It doesn't mean that is metaphysically possible. So
Yes, good distinction. So let's proceed next. We have a lot to cover yet. So second argument for your second premise is successive addition argument. How do you defend it?
I don't understand why people make such a big deal out of this. I think, personally, it's a very simple concept to understand. And I really struggle to understand why many atheists don't want to accept this. When you try to form a collection by adding one item at a time, that would be successive addition. One item after one item. It is as obvious as it gets. You will never get to the infinitieth item. Like, for example, if I'm collecting stamps, you will never get to the infinitieth stamp that completes your collection, because there's always the possibility of adding one more, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that an infinite number of items is it can only be in terms of a potential infinity. You will never get to actual infinity, not by successive addition. Now, I don't want to jump the gun, but how does this apply to the universe? Well, it applies to the universe because the universe seems to be going in a certain direction, right? Going forward, so to speak, from the past to the present to the future. And so from the perspective of the universe, that is event, 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 right? Events coming and going out of existence all the way to the present moment. And that is exactly, I think, the same concept of adding, right, successive addition, adding one more item to the collection. And all you get in the end is an enormous number of items, but never an infinity of items. So that's very as simple as it gets.
Amazing. So let's proceed next. We could talk about this, I think, a lot, but let's cover also scientific arguments. Do they support your second premise? And can you also respond to George Elise's model and cyclical universe model? How would you answer those?
Okay, so I'm not going to say much about scientific arguments because obviously, although I know a little bit, tiny bit about science, I'm not as trained in physics. And so who knows what the universe is like fundamentally. But from my perspective, from what I know, from what I have learned over the years, it seems that we have this Big Bang, right? Now nowadays, atheists and other non-believers or skeptics would say to you that the Big Bang doesn't really show anything. Doesn't say that. In my discussion, for example, with Richard Carrier, he was very adamant about it, that don't make the mistake of thinking that the Big Bang Theory, although the Big Bang Theory is a very well established, they have thrown all objections at it, and it has been confirmed many times. But don't make the mistake of thinking that the Big Bang Theory entails that the universe began to exist out of absolutely nothing. It doesn't say that. It only says that either from classical physics, right? The universe, this portion of the universe came into existence somehow. There could be more out there, right? And that's when you have all those interesting models, the cyclical model, the quantum model, the oscillating model, all those models. Okay, so what do I say about those? What I say about those is I don't have any prejudice about it. I'm not trying to advance a theistic view like Christianity or Judaism or Islam. Show me that there are compelling reasons that the universe could be eternal in some way, not just on paper. We need more than just mathematical, theoretical models. We need something that stands against problems and criticisms. And all those cyclical models and alternative models either require a beginning, or they have huge theoretical problems. This is my understanding of them. And I mean, I don't think it's a surprise, because if any of those models were compelling enough, I think that the scientific community would abandon the Big Bang model. They would abandon the idea that the universe has a beginning a finite time ago. So, to conclude my opinion on the scientific argument, scientific arguments are great when it comes to the Kalam, because they give the extra zing, but they are not required. So what's interesting about scientific arguments is that they corroborate the Kalam, they confirm the philosophical arguments, and they are independent of the philosophical arguments. So it's very interesting. So from my perspective, when I look at the question and I see that there are compelling arguments for premise 2, and quite independently, the current science is very positive that the universe had a beginning. There's a beginning of space-time. Well, then, to me, that's enough. That is really enough to believe strongly that premise 2 is true. So, again, as far as scientific arguments, what's interesting about them is that now, by scientific arguments, plural, with an S, I mean the Big Bang, but I also mean, for example, the fine-tuning. All these arguments seem to support the same idea, independently of the philosophical arguments.
Very good. I read in Daniel Limford's dissertation that even he admits that, I can quote him, he says in page 40, having rejected all three families of a priori arguments, in the next chapter, I summarize the a posteriori defense of the Kalam Cosmological Argument's second premise, together with some standard reasons for thinking the classical Big Bang cosmology, though not all together irrelevant for the Kalam Cosmological Argument second premise, does not adequately support the Kalam Cosmological Argument second premise. So even if he doesn't think that it supports, he doesn't say it's totally irrelevant. But sometimes I sense when atheists say that science and cosmology doesn't say anything about beginning or eternal cosmos. So I don't sense that. I think that there are some points or suggestions that maybe points in one or other direction. So maybe it's not totally irrelevant, like Limper said.
I have spoken I've spoken with Daniel Limford. He actually came to my my presentation of the Kalam with I don't know if you are aware of that presentation with Nathan Bray, and he asked some questions, and then we after my talk we had an interaction, and we were discussing this idea. And so first of all, I wanted to say, I don't think that Daniel would call himself an atheist. I don't think so. But in any case, I know from speaking to him for a long time that his idea essentially is he puts a lot of money on this idea. The idea that there is scientific evidence for a non-temporal segment of a universe. So he believes that it's a complicated. You said if you read his publications, so it's complicated, and I'm sorry if I butcher it right now. But essentially, he says, well, if you have a segment in the past, a segment that is that is non-temporal, where time is not metric, does not ticks metrically like it does now, for example. If that segment exists, then you can get around the problem of an actual beginning, because there is no beginning of the universe if time does not elapse the way it does now. Sorry if I butchered it, Daniel. But that's his basic idea. And my problem with that, as I told him, is that there is a little to no evidence of such a period. Now, what he replied to me was that what's his name, with the cyclical model, that Roger Penrose supports that idea. Yes, that's true. Roger Penrose has been trying to advance this idea of a cyclical model that involves a period of non-metric time. In other words, the way that Penrose puts it is that there can be a period when, actually, to say even the word when is strange, but what happens is that the universe is diluted so much that mass disappears. The only things around are photons or particles that do not have mass. And so what happens is that time as we know it literally disappears in a sense. Okay. Now, there's a lot to be said about that. But my main problem with that is that there's very little evidence. The only evidence that, as far as Daniel Linford pointed to me, indicated, is a paper published a few years ago, maybe now it could be 10 years ago or so, published by authored by Penrose and someone else, where they try to support the idea of a non-metric section, and his main argument, his main theory, that the universe is cyclical, that goes from ions to ions, right? Where there is this dilution of mass, time disappears, and then there's a moment where things go back from the start, and that would be what we measure as the Big Bang. So there's a cyclical idea. And the evidence that they're using is that when they looked at the microwave background radiation, they found they found these patterns. They found these ring-like shapes, and these rings in the background radiation indicate the a universe that that ended, and then there's a new universe, a new ion that come into existence. But it's not as if it comes into existence out of nothing, but it comes into existence from a non-temporal, non-metric period of time. Gets very technical. But my first reply would be, even if those rings mean something, mean what do you think that they mean, I don't think that there's any reason to believe that this process could go on literally forever. Not to mention the problem of how do you go from a non-metric temporal segment into a temporal one. People like Linford say, well, there's not a problem. Scientifically, it's very easy to explain how you do it. Well, the bottom line to me is that these ideas are very speculative. They are almost metaphysical in nature, and there's really no good evidence to for them.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Alvaro. I think, sorry for those questions. I didn't even send it, but I just wanted to know your
That's
opinion.
okay.
Yeah, anyhow, Linford and Malpass are really smart, so it's, I think, good to think about those arguments. They are really hard for me, at least. So, okay, let me ask you, what do you mean by at the beginning of the cosmos when you say that? Because does it mean the absolute beginning of all reality, in which case it is harder to argue for the truth of such a premise? Or do you allow for the existence of certain eternal or necessary entities that are timeless or initially changeless and so on?
I don't think that it makes sense to say that there are a number of eternal objects or concepts. What makes sense to me, based on what I can see from what I have learned, is that there is only one necessary object, or person, I would say, and that would be this entity that causes the universe into existence, that brings the universe into existence. Now, if what you have in mind is, but what about, let's say, mathematical truths? What about truth itself? I would argue, but we don't have time to explore that here. But I would argue that that these are modes or aspects of God's mind, right? So, for example, mathematics, right? Mathematical truths; those are aspects of God's mind, and you need to have these paradigms, and you need to have God as a paradigm, because unless you believe that necessary truths, there are many that philosophers recognize these necessary truths just appear as human beings and human minds appear, they wouldn't be, in that case, they wouldn't be necessary. So there has to be something at bottom. There has to be something that is not itself contingent. There's something necessary that grounds mathematical truth and logic, the laws of logic. Plato's Platonic forms don't do the job, would not do the job. So, because they are impersonal. So only a mind can ground those things, in my view. But I don't want to go too far now into the argument, because this is taking us elsewhere.
That's a separate topic, but thank you so much. And last question about second premise, even if it's 1 hour and a half. But let me just ask you about causal finitism thesis. Are there other solutions from Michael Huemer that infinite intense magnitudes cannot exist and that infinity is not a number? So those two principles can solve many paradoxes. And second solution is from Nicholas Shakel, the unsatisfiable pair diagnosis. Does that better explain why so many Benedetto paradoxes arise? Or is the causal finitism, or even no actual infinities principle from Robert Kuhns, a more elegant and simpler solution? And yeah, you don't need to explain all paradoxes. People can Google it about Grim Reaper, Thomson's lamp, infinity, fair lottery, but just explain, yeah.
I don't think that one is simpler than any other. I don't even know if they are simple. I don't think they are simple. In fact, we had a stumbling block in our conversation with Alex about the lamp, Thomson's lamp, because he thinks, and he has published some papers on this. I disagree with him. What he thinks is, the lamp, very quickly for the audience, the lamp paradox is supposed to show, what it's supposed to do is supposed to show that you cannot have an infinity, literally an infinity of temporal sequences. Let's say that you have 2 minutes, right? And you conduct an experiment. Is it possible to have an infinity of temporal moments within 2 minutes? And Thomson's lamp, as far as I understand it, maybe I got it wrong, shows that that's not possible. And the way that Thomson shows this is by imagining that you can turn on and off a lamp an infinity of times, because when you think about the fractions, right, the subtemporal moments within 2 minutes, within that interval, when you sum them up all together, they add up to a finite number. Okay. Now, the problem with that, according to the lamp's paradox, is that at the end of the experiment, it seems that you would have to say that the lamp is neither on nor off. But you are obligated to pick one. You are obligated to say, well, after 2 minutes, it's either one or the other. And it works very well. Now, Alex disagrees on that because he says that the only reason why it's strange, it's weird, it's paradoxical, is not because it is paradoxical, but it's because it is not specified enough. And my reply to him was, I don't know what more specification do you need. You have a lamp, you have 2 minutes time, okay? Turn it on and off an infinity of times. Is the lamp on or off? I think in my mind, it is very clear how that is a contradiction. It's paradoxical because either the lamp is on or it's off. But if an infinity of temporal sequences could exist, the lamp wouldn't be on or off. Now, is any of these arguments, the Grim Reaper or the lamp, more elegant than the other? I don't think so. But what I think personally is that it is beautiful that we have all of those arguments, because one argument, maybe the lamp itself in isolation wouldn't do it, would not stimulate the intuition of an atheist, right? To the degree that he or she might be convinced. But when you pile them up all together, one on top of the other, right? Then you're going to have to say, wait a minute. Every way you slice it, you're looking at infinity from many different angles. And all you get is paradoxes upon paradoxes. I think that any sensible person would say, there's something wrong with actual infinity. Now, of course, they remain unconvinced. People like Malpass and Linford and other people. But to me, for my intuition, that's more than enough. And I'm glad that there are so many of these paradoxes. And my paradox too, the one that I was explaining to him, the staircase, that's another one.
Amazing. So yeah, I get it. So if we want to say okay, maybe we have problems with actual infinities, with successive addition, with causal finitism, and those all paradoxes and scientific arguments. So maybe it's simpler and cheaper to say, okay, universe is just finite. So maybe it's easier to say that, and that there is no infinity. Yeah. So okay, let's proceed to third premise. You stated, therefore, the universe came into existence by something else, right?
Right, you mean the conclusion, not the third premise.
Yeah, conclusion. Yeah, sorry, yeah. But this argument is for no one, because it says like universe came into existence by something else, so there is no God in this conclusion. So why do you think that this is God?
Right. So now, before I comment on that, I just wanted to pick out something that you said. You said, well, maybe after all those arguments, this is the you use the word cheapest or whatnot. I think that is the most plausible conclusion, and it's not the cheapest conclusion because it is a conclusion, meaning the conclusion that second premise is true, must be true, based on an enormous effort, an enormous work. I mean, think about it. All these arguments that people have produced, the Grim Reaper and the staircase and the lamp and Hilbert's Hotel. So we have a rich tradition and an extensive argumentation in favor of the idea that an actual infinity can only, to quote, I can only quote David Hilbert on this. An actual infinite exists only in the mind, not in the physical world. Now, but let's say that you now accept all the argumentation as, in fact, as you probably know, there are some atheists who accept that the universe began to exist. And they say, well, I dare you now prove it to me that just because the universe began to exist, there is a God behind all that. Why does he have to be a God? Well, simply the way that I explain it is the following. If you have accepted the idea that everything that comes into existence from or by something else. Let's think about that for a moment. A protein comes into existence by way of a process that happens in the body. It's a process that takes all these amino acids and it forms a protein. So in other words, the process, so to speak, is an impersonal process. It's not as if there's a little human being within a human being that gathers all the amino acids and puts them together, right? But what about the universe? Well, if it's true that the universe is brought, if you accept the conclusion that the universe was brought into existence by something else, I think that it's from analyzing this conclusion, from thinking about the conclusion, I don't think that there's any doubt that it must be a mind. And it must be a mind because if you agree that the universe is not eternal, but it comes into existence, and to be abundantly clear, I mean space, time, energy, and everything in reality itself comes into existence. Okay? Well, we said that there is something else, which is the efficient cause of the universe. But then the efficient cause does not occupy space and it does not exist in time for obvious reasons. Because by creating the universe, this entity creates space and time. And the problem is that if this cause, this efficient cause, has the power to bring the universe into existence, either the universe is co-extensive or co-eternal with the efficient cause. I mean, the efficient cause is there. There's nothing to do for this efficient cause. It's not like there's time to think about it, or there's a mechanism that, let's say, after a certain time, like a timer, right, that goes off and it brings a certain effect into existence. There's no time. You have to understand there's no time whatsoever. Time does not elapse, doesn't exist at all. Space doesn't exist at all. Right? And so there are only two options. Either this efficient cause is there and nothing happens, and you would not have a universe at all. Or the efficient cause instantiates a certain effect, which would be the universe, from eternity. And the universe would be eternal and maybe atemporal even. So it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You need to introduce the idea of freedom of will. You need an efficient cause that can freely bring into existence a certain effect from a position that is not temporally prior, but ontologically prior. So you can have a mind that exists, pay attention, without the universe, not before the universe. Stop saying before the universe, people. Without the universe. And then, because this entity must be endowed with freedom of will, It must have free will, because only freedom of will means that an action can be initiated by an entity, by a free entity, free agent, without anything that happens antecedently, right? So I move my hand, I raise my hand, and there's no event that causes my hand to go up. That, in my view, is the only solution to this problem. How do you have, the problem is, how can you have a finite universe that starts ticking when whatever brought it into existence is a non-temporal, non-spatial entity? That's the only solution. It's got to be a mind.
Yes, but we can imagine that God created some angel in timeless state, and that angel created the universe. So it doesn't have to be God specifically. It could be some creature, right?
So you imagine that God delegated someone else. Yeah, the problem with that is that angels would have to exist temporally, because if God I think that at the moment of creation, God cannot create something else that is identical to God. I think it would be a contradiction. And so God could not create something else that exists atemporally. I don't think that you could have that, because that would entail that there is a passage of time from the moment that God creates the second entity, right? That's the way I see it. It's happening in a sequence, in a temporal sequence somehow. And I don't think that that's possible. That's why I think that the only possibility is that this God that I'm speaking of is an eternal and necessary entity or mind, but it's not as if this God has existed from eternity past, from an eternity. And then at one point, he wakes up and says, okay, let's go to work and create the universe. Now, it's all immediate. God creates the universe, and that happens at the same moment of the creation of time. So as God creates, that is the creation, and that enters into a temporal dimension.
Yes, but why to think that it must be timeless? Because many philosophers would give opinion that this is just the metric time. Like even Andrew Locke and William Lane Craig, they would give alternative view that maybe it's some metaphysical or topological time or amorphous. I think that's another term. So before metric time, we have another time. I don't know.
Oh, certainly not William Lane Craig. William Lane Craig does not believe that there's an amorphous or weird kind of time. Craig specifically has argued if you read his book on God and eternity, Craig has this hybrid, he calls it, view where God exists literally without time. There's no time, there's no kind of time at all, amorphous or strange or weird. There's no time at all. And then, so God exists outside time, without the universe. And then Craig argues that the moment that God creates the universe, God thereby enters into time. So God becomes a temporal entity with the universe. That's what
he believes that.
There are
Sorry
other
for jumping in.
Yeah.
Just to correct myself, because I know Craig believes that, but he gives space for other opinions. He says, like, okay, that's respectable to think that there is some metaphysical time, even if I don't agree with that. But I respect opinion of Swinburne, Mullins, and Paget. So he thinks Kalam is consistent with these views. So what do you think?
Yes. That's true. Ultimately, I don't think those views are correct, but I don't have a problem with them necessarily. I mean, I'm not biased that way. But the bottom line is they are consistent with the Kalam. Yes, as you said, it's correct. I think it would be possible. I'm not persuaded by those views. Believe it or not, I'm more inclined to Craig's view, but I have my own view that I explain in my book, in a chapter in my book. But yes, they are consistent. But it boils down to the same story, that you cannot have a temporal universe and a spatial universe from an impersonal entity. An impersonal entity would not be able to do the job. You need a mind. And now, of course, I don't want to cheat or jump the gun or anything, but there are there are excellent reasons to believe so, because it's not only that, but when you explore other arguments, like the fine-tuning, like the existence of the laws of logic, or like the existence of objective morality. Again, all these arguments, when you put them together, you put the puzzle together, they support the idea that this entity that causes the universe into existence is not just an impersonal one. Right? It must be a mind that thinks a certain way, and its thoughts are the paradigms of mathematics and the laws and everything that we know that exists.
But still, there could be angel. My previous point about creating angel that creates universe, really powerful angel. It could be existing in some metaphysical time, if we accept that theory. So, do you agree or no?
I mean, I mean, if for speculation for speculation's sake, sure. I mean, why not? But then I would say, why do that? Why can't God just create the universe? Why would it say, okay, let me create an angel. Hey, Joe, I've created you. Now go ahead and create the universe. And the angel is going to turn around to God and say, how do I do that? Well, I gave you all the instructions in your mind. Well, why didn't you do it then? I don't know. It seems to me an interesting story, but maybe it's possible.
Yes, very funny. Okay, so what if this cause stopped existing? Because it could be even personal creator or other things, but why do you think that it still exists? It could cease existing after creating.
I think that God is condemned to exist. Right? There's no question about that. I believe, in my mind, I believe that if God could somehow, I don't think it makes sense to say that, because, as I said, my definition of God is a necessary being. And so what necessary entails in the case of God is that it cannot not exist. It is condemned to existence. If God were to go out of existence, I think ultimately everything would go out of existence. There couldn't be a reality, a universe without a God. I don't think it would work.
Does it entail that this cause of the universe must be also eternal? Because it could be just necessary, but still not eternal.
Well, no, because for the reasons that we discussed, the universe is not itself, it's not a good candidate for an eternal being or a necessary being. So in my view, God is like it's like you're going on a boat and you remove the valve, the cap, and the water is going to come in and sink the boat. That's what God's function is to sustain and maintain reality. I don't think you could have God creating the universe and then God disappears and then reality will continue to exist. I don't think it's, but it's not that I have an argument for that. But it's just my intuition that, as far as I can see it, God must be a necessary being, and what that entails is that he cannot go out of existence.
Right, but how does God create? Because it is hard to imagine. Out of what does God bring the universe into existence? I think William Rowe or Mackey, I don't know who said, does he perhaps do it from nothing, using nothing? Like, how is it even possible for a personal mind to create things ex nihilo, given that we ourselves are personal minds and cannot do anything similar? Create something from nothing. Even if some spirit or soul or supernatural being exists, I still don't see how it could affect physical things if that being itself is not physical.
You know, there's a funny story about this, that I'm writing a response paper to some article that it came out. There's a Korean philosopher of science. His name is Dr. Park Sung-bae. And he just this year, a month ago or so, has published a critique of my article, the article to which we are referring. And he makes that objection. He says that how could God, even if there's a God, how could God create the universe out of nothing? How does he do that? He pulls some star-forming stuff out of his pockets. Where does he do that? How does he do that? Now, in my reply, I would say it's interesting because there are numerous papers, scientific papers, that argue. I can give you the reference to these papers because I'm using it in the article. And these papers are argue by physicists who argue that we now have evidence that certain subatomic particles literally, I don't know how they do it, how they know it, but literally come into being out of nothing. But it's funny that scientists are willing to accept that, but then they're not willing to accept that it is possible for a divinity to bring the universe into existence. I mean, think about it. you are willing to accept that a universe, a whole universe with specific, precise laws and regularities can come into existence out of nothing. But then when it comes to the idea that a God, a very powerful, intelligent God, is the efficient cause of the universe, that all of a sudden, it becomes a strange concept. I don't think it's strange at all. I don't think it's strange at all. And what I would say to you is, I don't know how God does it. Who would know? I don't think anybody knows how God does it. But if you are willing to accept that there is a powerful, as I said at the outset of our conversation, it might not be an omnipotent, all-powerful God, an omniscient God, but definitely it's got to have some enormous power, enormous intelligence. And so once you accept that, I think that that's the most plausible explanation of how you have a necessary being that accounts for, explains why reality exists, and it brings reality into existence. Now, how does he do it? I don't see why, in order for God to have the universe, God needs star powder or mud or any other physical substance, when scientists teach me that reality, at the fundamental level of reality is not made of stones and sand and mud and water, right? We hear this all the time. At the fundamental level of reality is not made of physical objects. It's made of, who knows, quantum particles or vibrations. Do you see what I mean? So if you're willing to accept contemporary science insofar as to accepting that what we call matter, which is the stuff that makes objects and the universe, space, time, dark energy, dark matter, black holes, all that at the fundamental level is not made of tiny little particles like marbles or tiny grains of sand. Right? It's made of some vibrations or something else that doesn't have a mass and a geographical location. Well, then you can see how a God could initiate that kind of fundamental layer of reality, which doesn't require physical matter like grains of sand and water and anything else like that, and cause the next layer of reality to come into existence. So I think that makes perfect sense. Unless you think that in order for something to exist, like a tree, you need tiny little pieces of matter. But that's an ancient idea. It's an ancient thought. Like Democritus, who believed that there are seeds. There is an infinity of seeds, he called them, right? Or atoms. And these atoms, they bump into each other and they come together and they form bigger objects. But that idea is obsolete. Nowadays, we understand that reality at a fundamental level is not made of concrete things that bash into each other. Then I would say, voila, that's how you explain how God can bring into existence that level of reality, which doesn't require God to have sand, star sand in his pockets and sprinkle that sand in and cause physical reality to exist. That's my explanation.
Yeah, interesting. So you said stars out of pockets, but what if stars and the universe is out of himself? Like we have the idea of creatio ex deo. So that's
Yeah.
like a creation from himself, from God, like some emergency or something like that. So what's your thought on that?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm open to that kind of idea. For some reason, for a variety of reasons, I'm more I'm not a pantheist or a panentheist or for some reason, for a variety of reasons that we don't have time to explore now. I'm more inclined to the idea that God and the universe are not the same thing, that the universe is not a mode or an aspect of the same God. I have reasons to believe that I, myself, and you are separate and individual entities, separate from God, that God created. But I'm open to that kind of idea. I mean, it's very interesting. After all, Spinoza gave a great argument in his ethics to that effect, that everything that exists by necessity, by the necessity of the creator God. And we are not individual selves, but we are modes of that God, different perspectives. There's a contemporary philosopher, Bernardo Kastrup. You might have heard of his name. No?
No, I
That's
haven't.
interesting. Really? Well, look him up. He is a proponent of idealism. He believes that, see, he has this interesting argument. He says, what exactly is matter? And he argues human beings have invented this term, matter, but matter doesn't even exist, doesn't really exist. What is it? Right? There is no such thing as matter. And so what does exist is reality, and reality is fundamentally mental. Right? So there is no such thing as matter. Now, the reason why he argues this way is to resolve the ancient problem of consciousness. How do you explain consciousness? If you start the universe with matter, matter plus matter equals matter, right? There's no intentionality, subjectivity, mental causation. There's no mind or anything like that. So it's a problem. So the way that you respond, a more effective way to resolve that problem, Bernardo says, is that everything is mental. That's modern idealism. Everything is mental, and that mental, then with biology, with the beginning of life of an individual, that is a dissociated portion of the whole, which is mental, and that becomes a person. But a person essentially is just a dissociated whole created by the matrix, which is mentality. That's what reality fundamentally is. And so there are different perspectives, but of the same thing, the mentality. Do I believe that that's correct? It's a possibility. I have reasons to believe that that's not true. But if you give me a good argument, I might change my mind.
Yeah, I think idealism is a respectable position, and people should maybe try to make sense of, to try to investigate it more. So it's good.
Yeah.
So let's back to our discussion. Could you explain what happened when God decided to create and how we should imagine that? Because on the one hand, we can ask whether the very will that appeared in God must itself have a cause, or whether the very act of creation and the beginning of acting and initiating the chain of events must itself be caused by something else. Whatever came first, would that not also have to have some cause of its own?
Yeah, there was a very famous philosopher, William Rowe, and I think it's the same guy who's famous for his evidential, inductive argument from evil, the Bambi argument from evil suffering in forest fire, and he says, but wait a minute, if God creates the universe, he has a will, and he decides to create the universe. That decision, that's not the way that William Rowe worded it, but that's the idea. If God says to himself, I want to create the universe, doesn't that mean that his desire to create the universe has a reason, has a cause? I mean, after all, right? There's cause and effect. But then whatever caused God's desire to create the universe must itself, in its turn, have another cause. And we're off to an infinite regress. Right? So I'm not sure what the problem would be. Well, I can see why he wants to argue that way, but my reply is, I think that argument is marred by a fundamental misunderstanding of how God would go about creating the universe. And I have not read what I'm about to say to you, in the Bible, on the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, or any religious text. This is what I can think from analyzing the argument and its implications. It seems to me that it is not correct to imagine that God is there, sitting there, folded arms, saying, I'm bored, let me create the universe. Right? It's a difficult thought to think about, but you've got to think that there is no such activity going on in God's mind. God's mind is completely actualized in the sense that what he knows and what he does is now. Okay? God does not go through ideas and thinks the way you and I think. That you begin wondering, and then you discuss some idea, and then you come up with the idea. From God's perspective, the creation of the universe is already there. His understanding of the creation of the universe is already there. But it doesn't happen in time. It happens immediately. So if you were to ask, but when did God create the universe? Well, that's the wrong way to put it. The right way to put it is, God created the universe. Done. Yeah, but when? When he creates the universe. That's when he does it. So it would be incorrect to think that God creates the universe after pondering or thinking about it, because his decision is already made. It is already eternal. That's his mind. That's his creation. And it happens now. It's not like you wait 1,000 years. There's something that influences God's decision, and that influences another decision, and all these converge into God's deciding to create the universe. See, that's the way that I explain it in my mind, that God creates, and there's nothing that comes before that, but there's only something that comes after that. So William Rowe's objection is misplaced, I think. It's not effective. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, I like your explanation. Thank you for that. So just a few more questions and we will finish, I promise. So sorry for taking so long. It's 2.5 hours, so we need to finish. But you mentioned that you don't necessarily accept omnipotence. I like that also. So you say enormously powerful, but why do you think that? It could be that because of the universe could merely be sufficiently powerful to initiate the first event, and that would lead to creating universe and other things. But why do you think that it must be enormously powerful?
Well, when I say enormously powerful, I can't really quantify it, but definitely if you think about how intricate the human DNA is, if you think about evolution, if you think about the initial conditions for the universe, the laws of nature. Now, think about mathematics. Think about the laws of logic. Think about morality and aesthetics, right? So values in general. Think how mind-blowing, incomprehensible those concepts are. It seems that you need a very, very powerful mind, very powerful entity that brings those things into existence. Or as I like to think of them, logic essentially is the way God thinks, right? And the laws of nature are the implications of his thinking. And so that's why I say enormously powerful. Clearly, it can't be just an angel or something else. It must be an entity, an agent or a being of a tremendous power to bring the universe into existence, and everything that we understand of the universe and everything that we don't yet understand about the universe. Now, the reason why I'm convinced that it's not a theistic God, but a deistic God would have to do, and it might not be an omnipotent God, is for a couple of reasons. One is that I don't believe that this God is omniscient, for the reason that I believe in freedom of will. I am what philosophers call a metaphysical libertarian. Okay, so a metaphysical libertarian is one who believes that not even in principle you could determine or tell what a person, a free agent, is going to do. Okay? Now, there are things that influence me, things that from the environment that I see, that I learned about. Those things can influence me, but ultimately, I am the unmoved mover of my decisions. That's what I believe. If you don't like it, I don't know what to tell you, but that's what I believe. And consequently, what that means is that the idea that God is omniscient in a theistic sense is that God can know what any free agent would do in the circumstances. But for all intents and purposes, what that means to me is that God knows what you are going to do. And I don't think I accept that. I think that not even God knows, if there is a God, knows what I'm going to do in the future. And because of some part of the problem of evil that I recently published, the new problem of evil, that leads me to believe that God is not necessarily omnipotent, cannot do whatever God wants. So maybe the existence of evil shows that not that there is no God, but that God has created humans and has given humans freedom of will. And that is what God did and nothing else. And God cannot have the power even to create human beings in a situation where they can be free without experiencing evil and suffering. So I don't think that you can get omnipotence from, in any case, not from the Kalam. Certainly not from the Kalam.
Amazing. So, must God be immaterial? Could it be that he is simply just made of a kind of matter different from the one familiar to us?
Well, going back to what I said before and what Bernardo Kastrup and other idealists, even Immanuel Kant, if you want to go back to Kant, what they have argued. I mean, what is matter? We don't even understand what matter is. We don't even know what matter is, if matter is really what we think it is. So maybe at the fundamental level of reality, matter is just what we are finite and imperfect human minds can perceive and understand a reality. But maybe at the fundamental level, there's nothing that corresponds to matter in a sense of particles bashing into each other. And as I said, contemporary science seems to say something along those lines. And so is God made of matter? What is matter? Maybe at the fundamental level, what God is the only thing that could be, what we perceive as matter is what our minds perceive as matter. And so I really don't know. I don't think that God is made of anything like atoms or particles, and it wouldn't make sense for the based on the argument, but based on the Kalam, I don't think it makes sense that God is made of anything, because everything that we understand as physical stuff comes into existence at the beginning of the universe. Now, what's beyond that? Well, it's got to be, if God is beyond that, it's beyond reality, that it must be that God is not a geographically an entity that is geographically located anywhere, because there is no where God can be located, and God is not made of literally anything of the kind that we understand here in the physical world. Now, could it be made of a non-physical stuff? I don't know what that would mean. So I would have to say that it most plausible to me that God is not made of anything. It is a pure mind, and it is the paradigm and the necessary reality for everything else.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Alvaro. What about attributes like spaceless and initially changeless or something like that? Would you ascribe that to God or not?
I would say that definitely I would say that God is spaceless. And I mean, it doesn't make any sense to say that God is, as I said, geographically located somewhere, unless you're a Christian and you think that Jesus is God, and then you can say Jesus is in my bedroom praying for me. But I don't think that the creator God that I have in mind is in space. It is not in space now, and it is not in space without the universe. Doesn't make sense. Just like it doesn't make sense to say that myself, I exist. I am my mind, which uses my physical body to exist in this physical realm. But I don't think that my mind, I as a mind, exist in any particular corner of the universe. So I don't think it makes sense to say that God is in space, so it's spaceless. Now, the other thing that you said...
yeah, changeless.
Oh, changeless. Yes, so it seems to me that also that for the reasons that I mentioned briefly before, it seems to me that God must be changeless. Otherwise, you would have to account for the change. How do you explain that one thing causes another? And you have the same problem with the Kalam. So I think that God is a simple, well, let me put it this way, a non-complicated mind. It is a mind, and it is already, it's pure actuality. It's an actualized mind. His thoughts and decisions and understanding are already in existence. They're actualized. So there is no change. And that is one of the reasons why I don't think that God is active like the God of theism in loving and in a active relationship with human beings. That's why I lean in the direction of deism. Now, whether we human beings will have a relationship with this God when we abandon this physical realm, that is a possibility. I believe that is a possibility. But not now, not in this realm, because we exist in incommensurable realms.
Are you open for some miracles? And if God wants to decide to appear in our world or something like that, could he do that or he couldn't?
I don't think that God can appear in our world, and I don't think that miracles can be real. And one of the reasons that I discuss in my book is that it seems to me that it contradicts even the theistic idea of freedom of will. So if God created human beings for our benefit, and plus you accept the theistic idea that evil is an instrument that God requires for human beings to grow morally and become virtuous, then the idea of a miracle is the idea of an intervention that will change the natural course of action, which would be, in my view, in my mind, is a breach of that freedom. It's taking away that freedom, or it's modifying or determining a certain course of action in accordance with God's desires. So I don't think that God would perform any miracle, even if he could, even speaking from a theistic perspective. I think you have to make up your mind. Either God created us and gave us creaturely freedom, robust freedom of will, in which case whatever we do is completely up to us, or you argue that God performs miracles, in which case then our future is going to be somehow modified by the will of God, which is contradictory to the hypothesis that we are free. And but in my view, that there's no reason to believe that God, and there's no reason for God to intervene and perform miracles. I mean, after all, the whole point is for God to create free agents, and it is for us to develop technology and to develop reason, rational thinking, to think about morality, and to be self-sufficient. A God that keeps nudging and intervening and modifying things, I think is contrary to the very idea of creation, of creating free agents who freely discover and appreciate the existence of God, and appreciate morality, and understand moral value, and understand duty, and everything else.
All right. So in the article, you set aside the question of whether a set of sufficient conditions and deterministic laws could exist eternally prior to the universe, which would be consistent with the first premise. Could you comment on that in a more detail? What exactly is the problem with that idea? I can think of other things like some brute facts, some impersonal metaphysical principles, abstract objects, fundamental laws, some field substances.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, suppose that, okay, so first of all, when people talk about a law, some people have in mind, they picture in their minds something like a hand or an object that pushes things along, that modifies things along. But a law, really, the way that we use the term law, like law of nature, law of physics, or this or that, is an explanation of some behavior, some behavior or some constant, something that occurs, some regularities, for example, like in the case of physical laws of nature. Now, suppose that there is this, let's use it. Let's go along and use the term law, fundamental law. Suppose that there exists such a fundamental law without the existence of space-time, without the existence of reality. Now, because time doesn't exist and space doesn't exist, I don't understand what this law would do and what it would mean for a law to exist without space and time. But suppose that you want to push the hypothesis and say, well, there is something principle maybe that exists without the universe, okay, that transcends the universe. Now, my question is this: what exactly does that principle entail? Suppose that that principle entails that given that principle, there is corn, tortillas, right? Now, if this principle is there, then corn tortillas would be there. There's no questions about that. There's no time for the principle to go through stages or a certain trajectory or a development where you go from a phase of non-corn tortillas to a phase of corn tortillas, because the only specification of this principle is corn tortillas. So if the principle is there and it is sufficient for a certain reality or effect, the effect must be there. And so I don't think that that would explain or account for the existence of the universe. I don't think that there are just principles floating there without the universe, and these principles somehow they work in a certain way that they change and they bring the universe or another effect into existence. It seems like playing a cheating, just playing with words. If you are willing to accept that there might be something without space and time, so there's no space, no time, no change, you have this principle just existing there. What does that mean? It means that that principle is there and nothing else comes out of it. Now, if you're willing to say, well, but this principle is such that you can't say at a certain time it changes its fundamental nature in such a way as to bring into existence something new, that's just cheating. You can't say that. And so you're stuck. Either there is this principle, but it's frozen, nothing happens, it's changeless, and nothing happens. Or you would have to say, well, maybe there is a principle. It's impersonal, and at some point it changes, but it changes why? There's something that the principle is acted upon by something else. And then you have the infinite regress of principles. So it's really, it's tough. You just cannot get away simply by saying there's something impersonal there, and that is the explanation for the universe. I highly doubt it. Do I know it with 100% certainty? No, because we don't understand, not even the best physicists in the world understand the fundamental reality of the universe. But logically speaking, philosophically, it doesn't make any sense to me. If you then present me a good argument, I will seriously take it into consideration.
Okay, good. So my last question for you, Dr. Alvaro, what are the good atheistic answers? Like I found alternative view from Quentin Smith proposal. He says that cause could be a timeless point from which the universe's first temporal state emerged. And also, since we so many times mentioned Alex Malpass, you debated him. So what was your impression? Did you change your mind about anything or come to see something in a new way during the discussion that you had not considered before? So,
well, let me go in reverse. Let me start with Alex. Alex Malpass is a very bright, very intelligent philosopher. He comes up with ideas that make me that I feel embarrassed, because I think, how brilliant. I would never think of something like that. He's really, really smart. But when it comes to the Kalam, the arguments that he tries to defend, and by the way, he's not, I don't think that Alex is 100% sure, no one is. So he's going to say, well, this is what I think, right?
Yeah, I think he's open. Yeah.
Right, he's open. He has an open mind. He's not one of those atheists. There is no God. But it seems to me that those arguments that the points that he makes, ultimately, they're just, I wouldn't say quibbling, but they are irrelevant. They are irrelevant to the overall argument. I mean, take, for example, he says, we had this extensive discussion about traversing an infinity. And I say to him, look, if we know that we have good reasons to believe that an infinity cannot exist, and it clearly cannot be traversed, and he accepts that you cannot traverse an infinity starting now, counting and traversing an infinity, that would be impossible. Now, to me, those arguments, those reasons are enough to make me think that if you cannot perform such a task, if you're not, no one is able to complete such a, I think not even God himself could traverse an infinity by going through one after another. But then Alex says, but I don't see logically that is logically symmetrical to coming here from infinity. His intuition is that it's not the same. And I said to him, but why not? If you can't do it one way, why should you expect to do it from the other way around? And as far as I can see, from what I heard, he doesn't really present an argument. He says, according to my intuition, it's not the same. Well, let's talk about an argument and then we can have a discussion. So I don't think those points do anything to affect in a negative way the Kalam. Now, with regard to your other question about atheists and atheism in general, I don't think, I'm really convinced that there is not one good argument for atheism, but now I have to qualify the idea of atheism. Because people recognize that there are different aspects of atheism. If you're an atheist in the sense, I don't know, who knows, or I don't have enough evidence as far as I understand that there's a God, that's one kind of atheism. Call it whatever you want. Explicit, not explicit. People give him different names. But then there's another kind of atheism. The atheism that to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever, that cannot be sustained intellectually. And I don't think that Alex is one of them at all. Intelligent people typically are not that kind of atheist. The kind of atheism that says that I think that this is the kind of atheism of maybe Richard Dawkins or people like Christopher Hitchens that was in fashion a decade ago or so, where you have these individuals making these bold statements. There is no God. And I can prove it to you. What is it? Victor Stenger. I don't know if you ever heard of Victor Stenger. He was a physicist. Yeah. Right? He published this book a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, when atheism was in fashion, strong atheism. And the title of this book was something like How Science Proves That God Doesn't Exist. I think that that's just silly. You can't do that. There's no argument that proves that God doesn't exist. And all the classical arguments like the problem of evil, the hiddenness, and any other argument that atheists have used over the centuries, they are not arguments for atheism. They're only skeptical arguments, but they are completely consistent with deism or theism or pantheism or any other form of theism.
But even Hitchens and Dawkins, I think I heard them talking that they are maybe open for some deistic being, but not Christian God. So I think they commented fine-tuning or something like that. But also Quentin Smith, that I mentioned, he says that science almost contradicts God's existence. I think in lecture he said like that. I heard that, yeah. So can you comment his view about timeless point from which universe's first temporal state emerged? What's the problem with that?
I have read Smith's work. I've watched some videos. He used to appear in his debates, like with William Lane Craig and other people. And frankly, I think that maybe 10, 20 years ago or so now, when these individuals were arguing that way, they were not aware of all the work. This is why I like the fact that the Kalam has been supported and defended and augmented by many philosophers like myself, Andrew Locke, William Lane Craig, etc. Because we have brought into to the table new elements that show that those arguments, the arguments like Quentin Smith's argument, Graham's, Oppie's arguments, like for example, I remember in my paper I mentioned Oppie's arguing something like this. Why should we believe that an actual infinity doesn't exist? Here's an example. 1, 2, 3, ellipsis, 3, 2, 1, 0. Voila. That's an actual infinity. And in my reply to him, in my article, I say, but what is the ellipsis supposed to stand for? If the ellipsis means add an infinity here, you're begging the question, right? Similarly, Smith says in a video that I watched, I remember, and reading his views on an article that appeared, a chapter in a Blackwell companion of what is it, theology, something like that. He writes, okay, before this point in time, there is another point, and before that point, there's another point, and before that point, there's another point, and there's an infinity of point. Therefore, the universe never began to exist. Now, I don't know if Quentin Smith is still alive. Probably he is. I don't know if he even himself believes that argument holds any water. If he's a smart man, as I think he is, he would probably, if you asked him now, he would probably recognize that's a silly argument.
Oh, sorry, he passed away, I think, 2020, so I just checked. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I was not aware of that. He was young, too. How old was he when he passed away?
Yeah, like 1952, so that's like 72 years.
He was young. He was a young 72-year-old young man. Okay. So anyway, I think that that's just a silly argument because what exactly are you trying to prove before that you're again, you're just showing potential infinity. You're showing what Zeno is trying to show, that before that you from going from A to B, you have to traverse an infinity of subportions, because you can, in principle, divide a segment an infinity of times, which is a logical fallacy, because in principle you can divide a portion, a length, infinitely many times, does not follow that there are an infinity of points between A and B. And so those arguments really don't do anything to refute the Kalam.
Okay, Dr. Alvaro, we need to wrap up. So what is the conclusion? I wrote down attributes what we get from Kalam, your version. If that succeeds, like we have a being that is enormously powerful, rational or knowledgeable, personal with free will, necessary, eternal, and it's one like entity, spaceless, uncaused, changeless, timeless. So I think even Craig agrees that it might be a deism, it's option. So he gives room for that thinking. But I wonder, what is the strongest argument against deism? So do you have any falsification, or what is troubles you? So any conclusion for audience at the end?
Well, that's not something that you can explain it in one sentence at the conclusion of our talk, but I would say this. In my book, I have a discussion as to why. But to give you a very short version of that, what Craig does is, obviously he's a Christian, so the linchpin of Christianity is Jesus, okay? Now, do we have evidence that Jesus existed? Yes, unless you are Richard Carrier, who says that we don't even have that. So I believe Jesus existed. Now, do we have good evidence that Jesus was the Son of God? He was resurrected by God, and he went back into the sky, and the Bible and Christianity is true? If you ask me, no. There's no historian in this world who believes that there's any evidence that Jesus, in addition to being a real person, was connected to God or was a divine individual. I don't believe that. You have to believe it. I think that personally, I don't want to say this in a deflationary or offensive way, but I think that, in my view, William Lane Craig is one of the brightest philosophers of our time. He's one of the most intelligent people that I know. But when it comes to Christianity, I think he drops the ball. Like many Christian philosophers, they drop the ball because the argumentation for the existence of objective moral value, the ontological argument, and the Kalam, all those arguments are incredibly powerful. When you look at the arguments for theism that bridge the gap from the conclusion of the Kalam and jump into theism, they're very thin. They're very thin, and Christianity is not just the only one. Muslims think that Christians are wrong. The Jews think that Christians are wrong. The Buddhists think that Christians are wrong, and vice versa. And I don't think we have good evidence. We have a lot of religions in the world, very thin arguments connecting the dots. I think that the most plausible conclusion is there is a God, but it's not a theistic God. It's not a God. And frankly, I'm going to end with this. And I had a very long conversation with Andrew Locke, because Andrew Locke is just a sweet and intelligent man. And he begged me, he's praying for me to become a Christian, because he says, well, you understand all the arguments. You see that there must be a God. Why not become a Christian? So he has invited me several times to become a Christian, to accept Christianity. And I said, I just cannot make that jump, because the way that you and I also understand the concept of God is that when I think of God, God must be such a beautiful, beautiful entity, just a perfect, it's hard to explain it with words how sublime this entity must be. And to think that this sublime entity is punishing people by sending them to hell, or requires that you eat fish on Friday, or you do not have sex with multiple women or men, it's just those ideas clash. I don't think that if there is this sublime entity God that is so petty as to send anybody to hell and suffer and be tortured for eternity, if you happen to, let's say, not to believe that he exists, right? To send all atheists to hell just because they genuinely, they cannot bring themselves to the truth of Christianity. That's my problem with theism, and that's I don't think I can make the jump from the conclusion of the Kalam into any theistic model.
Interesting conclusion. Sorry, maybe I didn't pronounce very well. I meant what are the strongest arguments against deism, like your view? Can you just
You
in
said
few words say, just summarize? You don't need to actually explain it deeper. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that the strongest arguments against deism would have to be the strongest arguments in favor of theism. So, for example, a person like Craig would have to say, the Bible is the true word of God. Okay, Jesus of Nazareth really existed, and if that is true, deism is false. I think that those would be the arguments, the best arguments against deism, because I think that a person like Craig or any Christian theologian or philosopher, even if they discovered, for example, that that it is false that Jesus came back from the dead, if it could be something that you could prove, what they would do, a person like Craig, would not thereby become an atheist, but he would fall back down to deism. I think that they would be deists. So what divides us is the truth of Christianity, or the truth of, if it's another religion, whatever the doctrines are for that religion. That is the dividing line. And those would be the arguments, the best arguments against deism. For example, an argument could be, we have reasons to believe that if God is a mind, and if I believe that God is a mind, is a personal being, then that entails that God is the God of theism, because a God that is a mind that is personal has, by definition, a relationship with his creation, and therefore theism is true and deism is false. Those are the arguments against deism, I think.
Very good. Dr. Alvaro, thank you for joining us and for such a thoughtful and rigorous discussion. Whether one agrees or disagrees, these are the questions that go to the foundation of philosophy, science, and human existence itself. Dear audience, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe, share the podcast, and leave your thoughts in the comment. Thank you all for listening to the NT podcast, and we will see you in the next episode. Goodbye.